All right, I want to talk about something today that used to be a pretty big soapbox item for me, but it's something that I really haven't talked about a lot lately. And I guess if I have talked about it, it's been sprinkled into certain conversations, whether it be with guests I've had here on the show or when I'm talking to you in these solo episodes, or maybe even as a guest on other shows. Nevertheless, it's just something that I feel like I really haven't talked about a lot, but I've been noticing something lately that made me revisit this, and I'll have a little connection to show you how the universe works here in a moment. But let's talk about download numbers. And I want to talk about this because it does play a significant role in your podcasting strategy. But what I want to impart upon you today is that it shouldn't play a significant role when you're first getting started. So hang out with me today, and I'm going to break this down for you. Hello, my name is Jason Sircone, and you have stumbled upon episode 92 of Podcasting Strategy Simplified. So, the download metric. It's such a polarizing subject in the podcasting space. And if you're in the podcasting space already, you know this. I guess it's an unwritten thing. However, I look at it as it must be the metric that everybody wants to see. The reason I say that is because all of the platforms that I've ever been a part of, whether it was for my own podcasts or podcasts that I've managed for clients, whenever you log in and you're looking at the episode, the download metric is always right there in your face. And it can really play some nasty tricks with your mind if you don't understand how to evaluate that number. I said at the open just a few seconds ago that I used to beat this drum pretty hard because the download metric, yes, while it does have value, I feel it's more vanity and ends up being a self-fulfilling prophecy. The reason I say that is because nobody is turning off your episodes because you don't have enough downloads. There is not one podcast listener out there that is finding your content, saying, yeah, this looks really good. I want to give this a listen. Perhaps this is the content that I've been looking for to change my life, to make significant strides forward. Oh, shit. They don't have enough downloads. I can't listen to this. No one is doing that. So that number becomes this mirage in the desert that we look at and we think it needs to be bigger than it actually is for whatever reason. And again, that can mess with your mind. And you can start to look at that number and say, it's not big enough. And that's based on arbitrary standards. But overall, it can say back to you, well, it's not big enough. Therefore, I'm not good at this. Therefore, no one cares about my show. And I'm never going to get anywhere. And why am I investing all of this time and effort into making this podcast? I'm just going to quit. If you think I'm crazy, look at the statistics of how many podcasts have not made it past their first 8 episodes, 10 episodes, 15 episodes. Any podcast that's faded away, I'll bet at some point in the pod fade phase, they probably were like, man, these download numbers suck. And if I were getting more downloads, I could get more from this. I actually had that conversation with a past client once. When we were doing the podcast, that wasn't the motive. We weren't building a podcast for downloads. In fact, I don't think anybody builds a podcast for downloads specifically. The downloads become the byproduct of great content because more people want to hear it. And when people are impacted, they share it with more people so it can be heard and it can be seen. And then that can lead to what bigger download numbers give you, such as sponsorships or higher ad revenue. And I hesitate to even say sponsorships because you can get that with lower download numbers. You see already, this metric has got so much falsity behind it. And at the end of the day, it's really not serving you what you need, especially in the beginning. I've said this many times. I've challenged new podcasters as they've gotten their shows off the ground. Do not look at your metrics for 6 months. In that 6-month period, focus on your content. Focus on your delivery. Focus on your message. Focus on getting comfortable and just having fun. This medium is supposed to be fun. If you're building your podcast the right way, you're building it around subject matter that you can talk about, even if no one is listening. And in the beginning, that's somewhat of a reality because your audience is small. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that because that gives you time to get confident, to get comfortable. And as you do that, your message starts to flow in a much better way. You start to have better conversations when you feature guests on your show. You make stronger connections through your solo content. And it ultimately leads to a better product that more people want to consume. But we live in a highlight reel culture and we get hung up on what we see everybody else doing. You've probably heard the saying that if you want to see a red car, you're going to see a red car everywhere you look because now you're focused on it. I feel like right now, and I'm not necessarily looking for this, but maybe I guess unbeknownst to me, my mind's telling me I should, or I'm just getting fed this crap by the algorithm. I'm seeing so many people bragging about their downloads, bragging about their income, making these financial statements, all of these things. And I'm just like, why does this matter? It's great if it's real. It's great if it's true, but it's not the real flex. To me, it's just douchey bro marketing. And I get nothing from that. And I feel like I'm seeing it all the time, probably because now like I said, here I am talking about it and I'm focused on it. So here comes more of it. There's more value in the content you're building than just how many downloads you get. It's not about that vanity. There's more value in everything you're doing than your income. And while income is great, it doesn't need to be the thing that you're leading with because it's not going to be the same for everyone. Even the people that you work with directly, it's not like they are going to experience the exact same results as you. You don't know if they have the work ethic you do. You might be able to teach them a system and show them what helped you get there, but it was your work ethic that ultimately pushed you to that goal that you had set for yourself. But if someone comes in this and says, okay, I can do this system, I'm ready to rock and roll, but they don't have the work ethic and they start to question things after one or two things go wrong, then they're not going to feel that same success as you. And then they're going to start questioning things, or they're going to start putting up barriers, or they're going to start shoving everybody else to the side saying, I've tried something like this before and it didn't work. So when you're building your podcast, I feel there's much more value when you look at your strategy and you look at everything that you want to build, and you know that everything that you're building is around subject matter that you're passionate about, but it serves your brand. It's all messaging designed to bring the right people under your umbrella, into your ecosystem. Now they can be exposed to everything that you can do for them or everything that your brand can offer. That doesn't need to be millions of people. I've asked people this when they get fixated on that download number. I know I've had a couple coaching clients that I've brought this up with. What happens if you wake up tomorrow and you open up your podcast app or you open up your podcast host and 50,000 new downloads are staring you in the face? What happens? And the people that I've asked that question to really didn't have an answer. And the reason why that I believe they don't have an answer, because it's not something that you're planning for. It's because we live in a world where we're told that bigger is better. That larger number is what success is equal to. But why? Okay, you got 50,000 downloads. What are you going to do with them? Maybe you can put yourself in a position to build sponsorship, build ads, or put ads, and you get more return on that because you have more downloads. But are you replicating that? Is that 50,000 going to be something that's consistent? How about if you're using your podcast to scale your business? All of a sudden, 50,000 downloads equates to how many new leads? It could be different for everyone, but more than likely, it's going to be something. And if it is, no matter what that number is, are you ready for it? If all of a sudden you wake up tomorrow with that 50,000 download boost on your show, and then you go look at your calendar for sales calls or discovery calls, and you've got 15 new sales calls all set up, Maybe you close half of them. Are you equipped to service those clients in the way that your standards would be met and they would get what they're expecting in return? You know your time and attention is going to be spread because you've got all these new clients that you're dealing with. These aren't necessarily bad problems to have, but they're things that you need to think about. If you were to get this big influx, you have to be ready for what that influx delivers on the back end. If all of a sudden you have all these new clients that are coming your way and you can't service them, well, then what was the point? Because now you run the risk of people being pissed off that you didn't deliver the experience that you promised. I say this to warn you to not get enamored by this need to get a big download on your podcast. When I sit down and do strategy days with my clients, we're looking at a lot of items. But numbers are not near the top of the priority list. We talk about them, but more in the long-term planning, because I don't want them to focus on what downloads happen this week when they haven't even built a skill set yet that could justify the number growing over time. Another way to look at this is downloads don't need to be huge this week because you are building a catalog and people are going to find your podcast at different points in that catalog. So you could be on episode 63, but someone finds episode 12 because you did a good job in setting your podcast up to be discovered. And maybe the title of episode 12 appeals to them much more than episode 63. So they go back in the timeline and back in the catalog and they listen to episode 12. If episode 12 truly does deliver what they were looking for, okay, well, what else is in this catalog? Maybe they go back to episode 1 and listen to everything. Maybe they jump back to 63 and start with the most current episode and work their way backwards. Either way, your content is valuable in perpetuity. As long as your podcast is live, downloads for this week are not relevant because you have a catalog that people can find and they can listen to, and the number of the entire catalog, meaning downloads across your whole show, are going to grow because people are finding it. And the more you stay consistent with new content and you keep your show active, the more it's telling the algorithm to push you a little bit up. It's going to give you a little bit more feature space. It's going to give you a little bit more of that amplification. But if your show goes away, yeah, your show might still exist in search, but people might look at it. I know I have a 30-day window, and this is just my personal preference. When I'm looking for podcasts to listen to, if they haven't put out a new episode in the last 30 days, typically I'll move on to something else. Now, I'll also look to see if they're season-based or series-based, and maybe they're just in between. And if they're in between their season or series, then I give them the benefit of the doubt. But if it's a show that's faded away a couple years ago, I usually shy away because more than likely they aren't active to the point where new content would be keeping up to date with the content that I'm looking for. There's nothing new here. Whatever I find, it's 2 years old. Now, maybe if it's evergreen content, it could still serve a purpose, but this is just my rule of thumb. In no way am I saying that you have to follow that, but as long as your show remains active, it's going to tell people that you are committed to bringing that new content forward. And that's going to help fuel the rest of your catalog getting downloads along the way. And I still see one of the big things that people focus on is what happens with a new episode in the first 7 days. Okay, I don't say that's not a metric to follow. However, if you don't know how to evaluate the metric, then it becomes a mind effort. And that's the problem that I see with putting a ton of focus on download numbers in the very beginning. If you're just looking at this number and saying, why isn't it growing? Or all of a sudden you're that meme with the stick figure with the stick pushing the rock saying, do something. Well, you're not going to get anything to happen there because your mind is going elsewhere. And if you don't think that bleeds into the next piece of content that you create, you're dead wrong. Because there's this seed of doubt planted in your mind that even though I put out this new content, I really don't think it's going to do anything because this episode last week didn't do anything, or all these other episodes aren't doing anything. Even if you have a small audience, your content is doing something, but you have to look at the numbers the right way. And this is why I recommend not looking at them at all, at least in the first 6 months. because that's time for you to fall in love. Now, I know people fall in love at different stages when they meet someone else. Some weeks, some months. I know I've been guilty of too fast in my past, but it is what it is. But in that 6-month window, that's typically when you know if this person is someone you love. Guess what? Your podcast is the same. In that 6-month window, you're going to learn if you love what you're doing. You're going to learn how to have better conversations with people. You're going to learn how to communicate in a better way through the microphone, through the camera. And as you make connections with your audience, that's going to get better and better each and every time you turn on the microphone and you press the record button. But if you're trying to fall in love in a couple weeks, then I'm telling you, all hell is going to break loose. And it's not going to be pretty. And I feel like that's an epidemic in podcasting because we put out our first episode and then we run to the host the next day and we see how many people downloaded and listened to our show. Well, I mean, I'm telling you, if you don't have an audience, chances are that number is very insignificant. And again, it's just not worth your time to focus on. So I've always stuck to that 6-month window. I feel that's a great time to build your confidence, build your catalog, keep focusing on the things that matter, and put emphasis on what's going to make you a better podcaster. As you start putting all of those things into practice, the numbers fall into place naturally. Again, it's not going to be millions and millions for all of us, nor does it need to be. Do not let someone that's telling you that, oh, I've got 1,000 downloads on my podcast already, tell you that you have to do that too in order to be successful. It's a weird flex to me. If you are focused on what you're building and you have clear intent on what this content is supposed to do for your brand, that's the win. And when you come into podcasting, you should not have a short-term window of, well, let's try this for 10 episodes and see what happens. At a minimum, you should be committed for a year. No matter what, you are going to do a year's worth of content before you make a true evaluation of what your podcast is going to be for the future. I recommend 2 years because if you treat it like a relationship, you've got that first 6-month window of figuring out whether this is the right person or, okay, so this is the right medium for me. Do I want to keep building upon this? Am I enjoying myself? Do I like sitting down and talking to others on my podcast? Do I enjoy connecting with my audience through solo content? If the answer is yes, okay, great. Now you can keep moving forward and you build upon that relationship. You're going to get better. You're going to get to know it more. Pretty soon, you're over a year. You've got over 50 episodes in your catalog. Maybe you decide you want to do more than that. Maybe you don't. Maybe you found that a weekly cadence is perfect. Maybe you leaned into seasons and you found that was the better approach for you. But you gave yourself a longer runway in which to take off. So now you have a clearer understanding of where things can go, and you're going to feel much more comfortable in your own skin. As you sit in front of the microphone, as you sit on the camera, you're going to have much more confidence in yourself to deliver a better message. This is going to determine the long-term scope of your show. But as you're planning, you have to give yourself that commitment. If you come into this just saying, let's try a few episodes and see what happens, not much is going to happen. It's very much like a one-time transaction. I've talked about this on past episodes of the show. If you bring guests on your show and you treat them as that one-time transaction, let's talk for 30 minutes, so thank you very much, I'll see you later, you're leaving a lot of opportunity on the table because you're not taking advantage of the potential relationship that you could build with that person, and you're just sending them on their way once you get that content from them. It's short-sighted. Works the same way here. Focus on what you can gain for the long run and don't think about the numbers in the beginning. Instead, think about what you can do to get even better at what you're doing, thus making your product something that more people want to listen to. And when that happens, as I said, the numbers fall into place naturally. I want to give a shout out to my friend Courtney Reimer over at Talking the Talk. Courtney's been here on the show. We sat down and had a great conversation on episode 84. But in the show notes, I'm going to link to episode 13 of her show. And I want to give a shout out to her guest, Lori Pine. Lori was on Courtney's show, and they were talking about the fact that when Lori started her podcast, she did so with a commitment to not look at her numbers for 1 year. I want to applaud Lori for that mindset because that is where it needs to be. Like I said, 6 months is a good window, but she put a year into it. And as you'll learn, if you listen to that episode, or I should say, when you listen to that episode, that's your homework assignment. Go listen to that episode after you finish this one. Lori got word from a listener, or I believe it was a client or one, I can't remember. It was some connection of hers that let her know that her show had reached top 5% global status. And she didn't even know what that meant because she wasn't looking at numbers. She was focusing on having fun. She was focusing on learning the medium. She was focusing on getting better at her craft. You know, I've been golfing since I was 7. Never have I been eligible or in a position where I could be eligible for the PGA. But I know when I was 7, I wasn't shooting as well as I would shoot today because I took time to learn the game. And at a very young age, I was fortunate that my dad put clubs in my hand and taught me how to do it. And then over time, I just had to keep working at it myself to develop somewhat of a skill set. And again, never anything that would make me go pro, but it's enough for me to be able to have fun with my friends and hang in there if we get into a scramble. Something that I want to do on the weekends is perhaps go play a round of golf. And I have the ability to do so and actually shoot fairly well because I've taken time to build my skill set over almost 40 years at this point, which is just freaking crazy to say out loud, but here we are. That's how you need to treat podcasting. You know, we look at strategy, obviously, on a high level here on this show. But to me, this speaks to the mindset piece that absolutely has to be in place. This is a key component of podcasting strategy. If your mindset is out of whack and you're looking at this as this short-term win of I'll put out a few episodes and everyone will listen to me and I'll have sponsors lining up and ad revenue out the ass. No. That isn't going to be what happens. And you're going to be in for a very hard fall and ultimately probably look at it and say, oh, God, this is just not going to work. This is not working for me. I'm out. You're going to get discouraged before you ever had a chance to even encourage yourself to be good at this because you didn't take time to evaluate the right metrics, which is not even really numbers related. It's all about who you're connecting with. Using this platform for networking, using it for connection and collaboration, and getting people into your ecosystem that maybe they don't purchase today, but because you keep serving them great content, they become a tremendous brand advocate, and maybe one day your most loyal customer. But we hear, you know, you've probably heard it 1,000 times, podcasting is a marathon, it's not a sprint. That's very true. But you have to focus on what you're doing along the way to make sure that marathon is run smoothly. I've never run a marathon. I probably never will. But I've talked to marathon runners that tell me that there are things you have to do on that trek to make sure your body holds up to that type of abuse. I mean, I know it's a big goal. I think it's abuse. It is what it is. But you're drinking water. You're eating different things like give your body energy, sugar, and I didn't know these things until my girlfriend's a marathon runner and she told me these things. I was like, wow, I get it. It makes sense. And when it comes to your podcasting marathon, you have to look at all the things that are happening along the way and you can make tweaks and adjustments. But if you're looking at that number staring you in the face from day one, it's going to screw your mind up, which is why, as hard as it is, you need to put it out of your mind, block it as much as possible. And even if you do catch a glimpse of it, because again, it's staring you right in the face when you log into these platforms, think about your long-term goals first. And that should be part of your strategy building. If you haven't set long-term goals for yourself that don't have anything to do with downloads, you're not going to stay as engaged as you need to be in the process. So down the road, once you're established, once you're feeling more comfortable, that 6-month period or even that year period that Lori did, once that's passed, and you want to start looking at your numbers, you can dig in and you can learn a lot. But you've taken the time to build a better product and you've given yourself more of a sample size to look at. So let's say you do wait a whole year. If you do one episode a week, that's 52 episodes. That's a much bigger sample size than putting out 5 episodes and then jumping into the metrics and saying, why isn't anybody listening to my show? This isn't going to do anything. Put that number on the back burner and focus more on who you're speaking to, how you're building a skill set that allows you to speak to them much more clearly. And as your product evolves, it's going to give people more reason to tell others to listen to your podcast. When you get to that point, that's when big things are going to start to happen. And big things is subjective as well. A big thing for me may not be the same for you, and that's okay, because you've taken time to establish what that means for you. And that's what's going to keep you engaged in the process of building a successful podcast over time. Now, before I bring the curtain down on this episode, I want to take a quick second to remind you about my Podcast VIP Accelerator program. This is a 2-week coaching program that allows us to work on a specific aspect of your podcasting strategy and help bring clarity to everything that you're doing with your show. If you'd like to learn more about this program, set up a free discovery call with me at jasonsircone.com/discovery call. The link is in the show notes. And with that, we're bringing the curtain down on episode 92 of Podcasting Strategy Simplified. I hope you had a great time. I know I did. Until our paths cross again, my name is Jason Sircone, reminding you that podcasting isn't easy, but it doesn't need to be complicated. I'll see you next time.